One of our favorite guests joins us again, Naomi Wolf. She's got a lot to discuss today, including public spaces for a prayer session that excludes women. Is this appropriate or not? I want to talk to her a little bit about some of the research we've been doing. We're going to discuss with actually Dr. Harvey Risch, who is one of the lead authors in this article on fenbendazole and ivermectin for cancer. And consistent with evaluating these sorts of studies, we're going to bring in Massimo Pulici, who is an evolutionary biologist and a philosopher. And he has a very special interest in pseudoscience, how we can identify pseudoscience. When does something meet a criteria that we can rely on as likely theory versus when is something just pseudoscience? All of that after this.
Our laws, as it pertains to substances, are draconian and bizarre. The psychopaths start this way. He was an alcoholic because of social media and pornography, PTSD, love addiction, fentanyl and heroin. Ridiculous. I'm a doctor, for Christ's sake. Where the hell do you think I learned that? I'm just saying, you go to treatment before you kill people. I am a clinician. I observe things about these chemicals. Let's just deal with what's real. We used to get these calls on Loveline all the time. Educate adolescents and to prevent and to treat. If you have trouble you can't stop and you want to help stop it, I can help. I got a lot to say. I got a lot more to say.
Dr. Naomi Wolf is an independent journalist, co-founder and CEO of dailyclout.io. She edited the Pfizer papers and authored Facing the Beast and War Room. A lot to get into. You can follow Naomi on X and Naomi Wolf, just one word, and naomiwolf.substack.com. Naomi, welcome back as always. Good to see you.
Thanks so much for having me. It's always wonderful to be with you all. Yeah.
So tell me your thoughts on this. I have mixed thoughts on, and I'm curious on yours. You got to straighten my brain out a little bit. There was this sort of takeover of, I believe it was Washington Square Park, for a prayer session excluding women. Is that a constitutional problem? Are we running into the issue of separation of church and state, which I've been reading a little bit about? I guess the way we think about it these days versus how the founding fathers thought about it are quite different. What do you think?
So, very timely question. And I always want to start by saying, I don't have blanket criticism of any group, any religion, any ethnicity. Just there's that. But the issue is that in particular, Islam in New York City is being kind of weaponized in a very territorial way. So the instance that you're referencing was thousands of people, mostly all men, from what I was able to see, in Washington Square Park, where incidentally, there's a mosque right there on Washington Square Park at NYU. I've been to it. I showed up, to show my solidarity with the Muslim community when there were waves of anti-Islam feeling. And there's a giant mosque right behind those people. And there was also a gathering in Brooklyn that Mayor Mamdani attended, which was also overwhelmingly male, with women cordoned off in a tiny section in the rear. So it raises a lot of questions, right, about public space and access and equality, especially because I just interviewed an activist from Britain. They're much further along in the weaponization of public space by imams, essentially. It's we kind of have to wake up that this isn't just your ordinary diversity issue in a free civil society. So it's not right to ask about constitutional questions in this case, respectfully, because it's not about the separation of church and state. You can have, you can worship in public in our society. It's perfectly constitutional. The issues that it raises for me legally are EOC law and also the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So the 1964 Civil Rights Act, of course, was the law that did away with Jim Crow, with separate but equal accommodations. And it basically said in public accommodations, you can't keep a group of people out. So the question for me is, if I, as a Brooklynite, half the time, taxpayer in New York, were to walk into the middle of those men in that public park, right? It's not a private space, it's taxpayer funded, that space. Would I be allowed to use that space? And if I'm not allowed to use it, if they don't part to let me in, right? If they cordon me off or block me out, especially with my dog, right? That if I can't join, if I can't make use of that facility, that is violating the 1964 Civil Rights Act, because I'm not equal in my use of that space. And in addition, I think Title IX and EEOC law are relevant because it's because of my gender that I'm being discriminated against in terms of access to that public space. So those are the questions that I would raise rather than constitutional ones.
And is somebody doing so?
Not to my knowledge. It's very kind of icky, right? Like what the weaponization of Islam does, and it's so cynical, is that it forces nice people to make not nice arguments. Even saying you're using your religion in a weaponizing way, in a territorial way, to create inequality or two-tier society is kind of not the kind of argument we want to make. We want to say kumbaya, everyone's welcome. You worship there and I'll worship here, and then we'll have, potluck together. So to my knowledge, no one has, but you're seeing the beginning in New York of the establishment of two-tier access to facilities, two-tier policing, privileging Islam at the expense of other religions. And that worries me a lot, partly because I'm Jewish, of course, and I'm a New Yorker, but partly because I've seen how Britain is so much further along. The guy was interviewing an attorney named Gavin Bobby, was saying that there are 4 stages where it starts with like public prayer, then it's like aggressive parking where parking is used territorially, then it's harassment of the local British people, and then it's the whole neighborhood becomes a no-go area for non-Muslims, essentially. And you don't want to believe that's happening in an advanced, secular, pluralistic society, but it really is. And it's very scary. And
let me ask this. Yeah. Isn't there a gigantic difference? And I guess I'm going to sort of frame it 2 ways. One, I believe there's a gigantic distance between somebody who practices Islam and Islamicism, right? And isn't this more a function of those in the sort of Islamicism group who are motivating a lot of this stuff?
I would say that I want to make that distinction too. Again, that's how we maintain our status as nice, non-racist, inclusive people. However, you would have thought that Zoran Mamdani, our mayor, was from the practicing Islam as opposed to Islamicist group, but his funding comes from radical organizations like CARE, for instance, and all he's done since he took office is host people who overtly support terrorists, Islamic terrorism. And his wife has been, exposed as supporting Hamas, approving of October 7th posts, saying that the rape of women on October 7th was a hoax, not real. It's not 1 or 2 off-color or bizarre comments. By now, it's systematically supporters of radical terrorist Islam, are being welcomed into Gracie Mansion. And it's definitely sending a message. And so, yes, I would want to believe that moderate Muslims who just want to live in peace in a pluralistic society would speak up and say, hey, that doesn't represent us. But unfortunately, there's so much backlash against moderate voices when they do try to pull back on some of this territoriality and extremism that you're not hearing them. I mean, I'm not hearing any moderate Muslim imams or leaders or business people saying, hey, what are you doing entertaining a terrorist supporter in Gracie Mansion? That's not what we're about. I wish I were hearing it, but I'm not.
Again, I think Mamdani is more just anti-Israel, anti-Zionist than pro-Islamicist per se. I just think he has allies on that side. Look at this video we've got alongside you here. This was a guy, this is in Canada, I think. Did you see it? Here, listen to this.
Tu m'as fait du profilage racial, tu m'as attendu tout le long au fucking parking. Ferme ta gueule, sale pute, tu m'as vu sortir et tu m'as vu rentrer dans la voiture, sale chienne de merde. Non, sale pute, ferme ta fucking gueule, tu veux mes affaires? J'ai eu un fucking bail il y a 2 jours. Est-ce que tu peux juste monter ta vite au petit projet de la chienne, la sale pute. Fucking bande de fils de pute de merde, là. Casse les couilles, sale chienne, c'est de ma faute, tu fais $20 de l'heure? Est-ce que c'est de ma faute, tu fais $20 de l'heure?
Amazing. I learned a new cuss word in French too, chien de merde. I didn't know about that one. It's not son of a bitch. So I'll tell you, it translates quite differently. So what's that, Caleb?
Look, Dr. Drew, that horrific misogynist guy doesn't represent all Muslims, of course. However, I have kind of crossed Rubicon because I wrote an essay called "It's Not Racist to Be Culturist." And the truth is, we have to face this. Deep rural Pakistani men treat women with absolute abusiveness as many of them as part of their culture. Right. A lot of people have come.
I did not expect to go here with you today, but I'm going to throw down the gauntlet. You have always been such an important voice for women, and particularly feminism per se. It is time that Naomi Wolf navigate, I guess is the word. Maybe you're already doing it. If I know you well enough, you probably already are writing this stuff somewhere. How do we navigate these people who defend movements and organizations and points of view that are explicitly misogynistic, anti-gay, all the things that feminism is supposed to stand for? What mental gymnastics are people doing to be able to do that? And how can we lead them back to sanity, or at least they stand with women?
So this is such a sad thing to say, but I've reached the conclusion that, and a lot of sane, tolerant people are reaching this conclusion, that importing millions of people from cultures where 98% of the women have their clitorises and outer labia cut off when they're children, which is literally all of sub-Saharan Africa, is not ever going to work. Importing millions of people from cultures that marry off girls against their will at 9 years old, it's not going to result in assimilation. You're bringing those cultures with you when you've got mass migration to the West. And I've reached the conclusion, I don't think this is racist, that if you want to have a thriving, peaceful Western American, Western European culture in which gay people are equal, in which women are equal, you cannot have open borders. You can't have mass immigration from parts of the world where they just don't feel that way. And you've got to, I think it's almost racist to expect people to abandon their deeply held views about the status of women or homosexuals just because they're physically on our soil. I think we have to face the fact that there are cultures that are literally incompatible with one another. I've been to those parts of the world, Dr. Drew. NGOs spend millions of dollars. I'll never forget big billboards in Sierra Leone basically telling men in general not to rape women in general, because in general, men were raping women. I'm not kidding. It's so culturally not extremist.
Hey guys, it's not a good idea. We're telling you from America. Maybe you ought to rethink the whole raping thing. Well, I'm laughing because it's so horrible. It's beyond, but why? What do we do to the young women that are supporting? I think you've made the case that I think that they would defend. I think they would say, yes, that's right. They're entitled to their points of view. They're entitled to their culture. But you as a woman don't have to play along with it. Right. You don't have to be a part of it. You don't have to, you can stand up to it.
You're asking a horrible, tough question, because I do see, people pro-Palestine movement Queers for Palestine. It's such a contradiction. It's a 10-year prison sentence in Gaza to be gay.
Exactly.
People are tortured in Egypt for being male homosexuals. Currently, not 20 years ago, to this day. So I think liberals and leftists who think that they're being right on by supporting those cultures are incredibly ill-informed and naive, and they should get on a plane and go to those cultures and see what actually happens. Talk to people in NGOs. People are taking huge risks being feminists in some very woman-hating societies, huge risks being gay rights activists in societies where gay people are thrown off of buildings or, executed or sent to prison, as in parts of Palestine or, many parts of the Muslim world. It's not a joke. I will never forget what I saw in Sierra Leone. It stayed with me for the whole rest of my life. You can spend millions of dollars trying to solve a problem, problems that are so deeply cultural, you're never going to solve them. And in sub-Saharan Africa, it's women leading NGOs who are saying, 11% of decision makers in sub-Saharan Africa are girls and women because of a culture that doesn't see it as being appropriate for women to make decisions. You're not going to be able to, import those civilizations wholesale into the West. And suddenly the men in those cultures are going to be like, okay, fine, I was wrong this whole time. I've seen a Hollywood movie. I've seen a Western businesswoman. I've been wrong. That's not going to happen. So I think honestly, Dr. Drew, what are we going to do to bring the fringe, insane left into sanity? We can keep talking to them, but it's a mass hallucination at this point. And I think we really just have to support America first and Britain first and the nationalist sovereign nation movements in Western Europe, and stop being afraid of being called racists, because we're not, and let people close their borders and reclaim their own cultures. That's, we've got to save our own civilization.
We need a Naomi Wolf book for women. I just feel it. Sorry to lay that on you, but I just think, the time is right. I think that because people are so confused, and I'm thinking more and more that leadership of various types is sort of what's needed to help people navigate through this. Like you said, it's a sort of a brainwashing and whatnot. Well, listen. As always, I love having you here. Is there anything else you wanted to address? I understand you've been very worried on X about geoengineering. I don't have a feeling about it, but what are your thoughts?
I've been reporting on geoengineering since 2017, to much mockery. Like, there's a whole mockery industry that the geoengineering interests, it appears, subsidize. But I've been, right since 2017. Harvard has a whole geoengineering program. Dr. David Keith runs it, and they do illegal experiments on Native American land so that they can be outside of U.S. law, and they spray sulfur dioxide over Arizona. That dates back nearly a decade now. The Carnegie Foundation funds geoengineering. There's various forms of geoengineering. There's cloud seeding in many Western states that has a role in the fires. Unfortunately, in California, it desiccates the foliage, makes it more flammable. There's something called marine cloud brightening. There's solar radiation management, which is what we see a lot in the Northeast, where you see kind of emissions from planes that spread out and cover the sky and block the sun. We have a day like this here in upstate New York. And, obviously, and many interests are doing it. I traced one of the programs to the Department of Energy. And people do notice that when there's a government shutdown, the skies are really clear. And during the lockdowns, the skies were really clear. So, clearly there are some government programs, military programs, no doubt, involved in various forms of geoengineering. It's just very dangerous for a lot of reasons. One is that, as you know better than I, humans need sunshine and vitamin D. All animals do. Foliage and crops need sun. But another reason is asthma, allergies. We're breathing particulates. Sulfur dioxide is a pollutant, right? And they're spraying it as part of solar radiation management. And lastly, I think humans evolved to have a very intimate relationship with the sky and weather. And we feel when something's human is interfering with it. And I think it demoralizes us and depresses us. Sometimes I think that's one of the purposes of so much geoengineering, is to lead us to give up. We've certainly lived through years in which decision makers were trying to encourage us to give up and not ask questions. So there's a lot more reporting to be done. We don't know a lot of things about geoengineering, but it is thoroughly confirmed that it's a thoroughly funded industry, and many key players are funding it for very nefarious reasons of their own.
Naomi, where do you want people to go to find you?
Come to Naomi R. Wolf on X. Come over to Substack. My Substack is called Outspoken, or come to Daily Clout, my platform.
See you there, and look forward to you joining us again very soon. Thanks, Naomi.
Thanks so much for having me, Dr. Drew.
You bet. All right. Coming up, I'm going to speak to Massimo Pulici. He is someone I found years ago, actually, and I really enjoy his thinking because he comes from a scientific perspective, but he is also a philosopher, a stoicist. We have a call-in number. I'm not sure when I'm going to take calls, but I promise you I will take them at some point today. The number is, Caleb, I don't have it in front of me.
1333.
There you go.
3 Dr. Drew.
So it's 1-833-3 Dr. Drew.
333.
Wait, let me tell. I'll say it. It's 1-833-3 Dr. Drew, which is 1-833-337-3739. Or if you didn't hear me say it, you can just go to drdrew.com/call. And you could actually even call in from your browser, or just find the phone numbers right there, drdrew.com/call.
All right, let me give you some places you can find Massimo, which I do strongly recommend you follow him on X. I don't see his X thing here. His Substack is
he doesn't have
what's wrong with metrics. That is figs. Oh boy. figsinwintertime.substack.com. That's his Substack on Darwinism. We're going to talk all about this stuff. I don't see Caleb, I need an X handle for
when we're going to take their questions, because they're calling and they're waiting and they're hanging up, and we just want to make sure that people understand.
So we'll take calls especially if they're relevant to the guest, but then if we don't take calls throughout the show, then Drew's going to take some calls at the end for sure. So if people are still waiting by then, we're just going to answer questions. And this is our first day back to having the call-in number, so I'm just trying to make sure everything runs smoothly.
All right, back with Massimo Pulici. I've spent most of my career dealing with illnesses that shorten life, and now we have ways to extend it and extend wellness. I've been working with the team over at VShred to develop a product that has everything I want in a longevity supplement. NR Boost has nicotinamide riboside. You know, metal can rust. Well, your body behaves in a similar way. It's mediated through something called NAD. NAD falls as we age, so we're less able to fight off that oxidative process. We oxidize much like that metal. And NAD fights it, but nicotinamide riboside elevates NAD so we can push back on those oxidative stressors, improving health, improving longevity. The other product is Senosync, has fisetin, one of the key molecules to fight off zombie cells, and we've added resveratrol to that, which is a well-known anti-aging antioxidant again. I don't like supplements that have a ton of ingredients. To me, it suggests that none of it's working. When I prescribe a medication, I prescribe that medicine because I expect that to work. That is exactly what I've done with these products. And I want you to go to drdrew.com/vshredmd for 10% off. Again, that is drdrew.com/vshredmd. Something our audience knows well is that what's good for our health can also be good for the environment. Paleo Valley makes snacks, drinks, oils, and more that are nutrient-dense, delicious, and impeccably sourced. Co-founder Autumn Smith champions regenerative farming. It's a level beyond organic.
When you go to the grocery store, 90% of the animal products you're going to buy are from factory farms. And we obviously know factory farms work against nature. They work against animal health and in many ways against human health. Regenerative regenerative farms work on taking the landscape or the ecosystem from a degraded state, which the environment right now needs a lot of rehabilitation, and we have lower nutrient levels in our soil than ever before. We found that animal products from regenerative systems have nutritional benefits above and beyond other types of animal products.
Paleo Valley's beef sticks and bone broth protein powder are my favorites, and they come from regenerative farms. And the sticks also come in pasture-raised chicken as well.
We actually just went and visited one of our chicken farmers, and we work with a lot of co-ops and people all over the country.
We are such fans of Autumn, her work, and her extraordinary small business. Go to drdrew.com/Paleo Valley for a 15% discount on your first order, or get 20% off when you subscribe.
Dr. Drew said the best way to quit drinking is by going cold turkey, and he's a doctor, so why would you question doctors?
Dr. Drew called me unfixable.
All right, I finally got to the particulars here. It's MassimoPulici.net, spelled MassimoPigLiucci.net. Figs in Wintertime is the Substack. On X, he is YEETBLM. I believe he said it's not active there, but there's a lot of little posts there. And his books are phenomenal. Beyond Stoicism, The Quest for Character, with the story of Socrates and Alcibiades. Hang on, I lost it again. I don't know, my computer's doing this. Tells us about our search for good leaders and nonsense on stilts, how to tell science from bunk. How to be a happy skeptic, that's another one. Massimo, thank you so much for being here. I mean, I'm overwhelmed by your work and your thinking and what you produce. And it just occurred to me that there's so much confusion out there in the world. And, you used to talk about skepticism when I would dare say people almost knew the difference between science and pseudoscience. Now it's all over the place. How do people tell the difference?
Yeah, thank you for having me, first of all. It's a very good question. When I wrote my first book about pseudoscience, Nonsense on Stilts, a number of years ago, I actually had a hard time convincing the editor that this was something relevant, because the typical response was, well, what's the harm? People are believing stuff that is not quite real, so what's the worst thing that can happen? Well, we're seeing it now. We have major branches of the American government that subscribe to pseudoscientific notions. And that literally kills people. And if it doesn't kill them, it certainly doesn't make them feel any better. Now, how do we tell the difference between the two? Oh, that's $1 million question. Actually, probably more than $1 million actually worth of a question. It's a philosophical question that has been around for a long time. The first one to raise it in modern times was a guy named Karl Popper at the beginning of the 20th century. He was a major influential philosopher of science. And he asked himself, how do we tell the difference between, what is good science, sound science, and what is not? And he made also an additional distinction. The question is not just what's the difference between science and pseudoscience. The question is also what's the difference between good science and science that can be wrong. Scientists are human beings.
I think
can make mistakes.
Listen. I think that is the fine point I think we need to put on this conversation today, because a lot of science flies around, but my God, is it not good science? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the scientific method itself has been, I wouldn't say undermined, it hasn't been properly taught. I mean, it's a delicate instrument to query the physical environment, and it's turned into all kinds of permutations. In my world, it was always come up with a hypothesis, ask the simplest question you possibly can, create an experiment that the null hypothesis becomes informative or non-informative rather, do a statistical analysis to back that up, and there's your scientific method. I almost never see papers that are constructed that way now.
Right. I mean, and very few people, especially outside, of course, of professional scientists, know anything at all about the scientific method, how science works as a process. The important point, I think, to understand in the context of this discussion is that science is a human activity. So yes, scientists can go wrong. Arguably, that's a major feature of the scientific method is precisely that is a method to figure out eventually, given enough time and resources, where we go wrong so that we can correct it, right? So it's not about getting everything right. It's about figuring out when things go wrong, what is a good way to fix them.
Yeah.
As opposed to a pseudoscience where there is no effort of correcting anything. There is an effort either to believe in something, I want to believe, I don't know, that astrology works, for instance, and I don't want to hear about evidence. I don't want to hear about anything from astronomers or psychologists or anything like that. Or it's a way to sell something to people. Right. So I can tell you this thing because this is really going to solve your life. This is really going to be making a difference in your life. That's the problem. How do ordinary people, outside of somebody who is not trained in science, tell the difference if it's true that sometimes even scientists themselves can't tell the difference, or at least it's not that obvious. To some extent, I think the answer to that question is, well, pretty much the way you would tell the difference between, let's say, a good dentist and a bad dentist, or a good car mechanic and a bad car mechanic. What do you do? Well, first of all, you check their credentials. Now, is this guy actually a dentist? Where did he go to dentistry school? And does he have an actual diploma? In other words, he's somebody that at least at first sight I can say, yeah, this person probably knows what they're doing. Second, that's not enough, however, right? Because lots of people can get a degree or can be certified in this or that or the other, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you can trust them. Second, does this person know what he's talking about? Now, that's a tricky part, right? Because unless you're yourself a dentist or a car mechanic, let's say, you might not be able to tell if a particular individual is telling you things that make sense or not. So you rely on their track record. Have they been able to fix cars in the past? Are the people that go to this guy as a dentist actually satisfied? Or, what is my own experience with this, with the same people? Did I get satisfactory answers that actually solved problems, that actually made progress? So there is a number of ways in which, even though you're not an expert, you can start assessing the alleged expertise of people based on what they say, who they say they are, whether you can verify that or not, whether they have a track record, what other experts in that area believe or think about that particular topic. If my dentist tells me that I have a very unusual problem that he's never seen before and needs to be fixed in a very strange way, the first thing I'm going to do is to go to a second dentist for a second opinion. And then it may turn out that he's right, yes. In which case, fine, but not necessarily.
And there, to me, there's a couple other issues here that are coming to bear on all this. Is a grotesque lack of understanding of biological systems and how spectacularly complicated they are and how probabilistic they are. And people want X plus Y equals Z, and that's not biology. I always tell people it's more like predicting cloud behavior. It's much more difficult than even physics, or at least basic physics. And the other thing is that I think it sort of underpins all of this. People are not good at assessing their cognitive faculties, and I don't mean intelligence. I mean the degree. I mean things like memory. They rely too much on memory, and their ability to be persuaded or deluded by all the nonsense that's flying around, and how they behave. Just look at their own behavior when information is incomplete and how they fill it with all kinds of paranoid nonsense. Do you agree with me that that's a major issue, and what do we do about that?
Yeah, it is a major issue, and it's a really difficult one to address. And by people I mean everybody, including myself. We tend to overestimate. We suffer from a number of well-documented cognitive biases, which translate when we try to reason about things in what philosophers call logical fallacies. So we engage in all sorts of fallacious behavior and thinking, because we think we're immune. Oh yeah, other people certainly have biases and commit logical, but I know better. Right? I'm not that stupid. Well, it turns out this is a universal phenomenon. Even very smart people. In fact, you can argue, and there is a significant amount of evidence about this, that particularly smart and educated people are prone to biases and selection of evidence and all that sort of stuff precisely because they're smart. They can come up with all sorts of ways to fool themselves, in a sense, to justify what they want to do. There is no silver bullet there, but certainly one thing to do is to engage with other people as honestly as we can. That is, before making any important decision in your life that concerns your health or that concerns, what your stance is on major issues. For instance, when it's time to go to vote for this politician or that other politician, not only inform yourself, but debate with other people. Debate not in a confrontation way, just talk to other people. Talk to people of different opinions, especially if these are themselves people who actually know quite a bit about what they're talking about. Exposing ourselves to different opinions, especially from friends and people who we trust, is actually a good way to double check what we ourselves are thinking. We tend not to trust people who have a different opinion unless we can trust them for other reasons. So if we already have a good relationship with somebody, then it's more likely that we're actually going to pay attention to what they're saying. They're going to get past our immediate first response, which tends to be, no, I don't believe this, or what I think I know is already correct. But there is no universal cure. I mean, that's you might have noticed that's a universal problem that we have in society. It's very easy to convince people of certain things that are convenient, that that make their lives easier or better, and so on. And it's very difficult to convince them of things that are hard, that require work, and that might not be welcome.
And they have a tendency, for whatever reason, in recent times, to hunker down sort of defensively in beliefs that have a sort of the emotional cognitive mechanisms are similar to how people protect religious views. It's somehow an attack on their very being. All those functional mechanisms in the brain fire out, similar to if they're being physically assaulted, this is not good for thinking. It's not. And by the way, I'm noticing it happening amongst my peers, where we used to collaborate and have good-natured, discourse and even fight. Now it's violent. It's like you dismissive.
Well, I think you put the finger on the problem when you talk about essentially personal identity. We got into a point in society where notions that you would think had nothing to do with personal beliefs, religious beliefs, and stuff like that, have actually come to identify people. So I think of myself as a, you name it, progressive or conservative or Christian or non-Christian or whatever it is. Therefore, this means that I automatically accept a certain number of notions because my tribe has come to accept those notions and seeing that and sees them as identifying, the group as opposed to and differentiating from the out-group. It wasn't always like that. I mean, this is to some extent the in-group, out-group dynamic is universal. It's a product probably of evolution. But it wasn't as bad in recent times as it is now. And there's evidence from studies in political and social science that the polarization of discourse and public discourse has gotten much worse in the United States over the last 20 to 30 years. And that's unfortunate. And it's going to be really difficult to reverse this trend, because once it's entrenched, it takes a lot of effort and a lot of education to undo it.
Yeah. Were you ever interviewed by the guy that does that podcast, You Are Not So Smart? He's sort of looking at all these cognitive biases and things. You ever come across that?
I'm sorry, cognitive biases and...
No. This is a podcast called You Are Not So Smart. I would imagine he would have interviewed you over the years.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But the point is, I lost what my point was, as a matter of fact. Oh, I know. That was the fact that in order to change people's mind, two things. You have to also change their worldview and their view of their peers and everybody they trust. All that is a sort of a scaffolding. Right. And I heard a woman, the other day. She said we used to be a climate like extreme activist, and she said during COVID when entire economies were shut down, she looked at the CO2 output and it had gone down 17%. She thought, wait a minute, what are we doing here? We have to, even if we shut the world down, it will not have the kind of, we were going for zero CO2. That's impossible. And so she started looking around at all the things and she realized there'd been a lot of distortion. And she said, look, I was in college and I was told I was a white colonialist, privileged, and I thought, I'm a good person. I'm not part of that. What can I know what I'll do. I'll save the world. I'll save the world by dealing with the climate crisis. And so her sense of herself got tied into all of this. And I'm sure stuff like that is very much involved in many of these belief ideologies, belief systems that are so highly defended.
Well, we know there is actually research on how people change their mind. And it, broadly speaking, I'm simplifying a bit, but broadly speaking, it falls into two categories. Either we change our mind as a result of a single, highly emotionally impacting event. 9/11 happens, people become religious, or the opposite, they become atheists as a result of that single event, because it has such a high impact from an emotional perspective that completely forces people instantaneously, basically, to reassess their worldview. Or the other way is it happens very slowly over a period of many years as a result of multiple exposures to certain ideas from different sources. And it depends on whether you trust those sources or not. Now, psychologists will tell you that the second way is far better, because it's more deliberate. It's you have more time to actually think things over, to reassess your entire worldview if need be, to figure out ways in which the new opinion, the new notion is going to fit with the rest of what you believe. If you change your mind instantaneously or very quickly as a result of an emotional reaction, you're just as likely to change it back if something else happened down the line. The problem, of course, is that
makes sense.
Try to put an entire population through years of multiple exposure from reliable sources and so on and so forth. It takes what we call critical thinking, education, and so on and so forth. And that costs money and takes time. And those are things that people don't want to do.
And unfortunately. And then finally, I feel like it is time. Your book, Character, may have come out too soon on character, and it is time for people to begin to examine character. By the way, is your accent Hungarian? Is that what I'm hearing?
No, it's Italian.
Italian. Okay, that's right. I should have known with the last name. But talk to us about what we could learn from that book that might be. I don't know. I don't know why, because they are so resistant to exactly what you just described, right? Educate yourself, pay attention, to reassess your thinking, be a scientist. Maybe character is where we should be focusing our attention. And is that a possible solution as well?
It is a possible solution. I believe that's why I wrote The Quest for Character, which you may be right, came out a little too early. But it does take also a lot of effort, and we're coming down to the same problem that most of us don't want to make the effort. Nevertheless,
well,
it is a different kind of effort.
Let me interrupt you, Massimo. I'll interrupt you one quick. Aristotle, I haven't read your book, but I would like to. Aristotle essentially spelled it out and said, it's as simple as this: good habits. That's essentially what he said. Do it again and again and again, and pretty soon it'll become part of your character.
That's right. Yeah, that is correct. With an important caveat, you have to not only do it over and over, but you have to do it mindfully over and over. That is, rote repetition doesn't do it. If you just do things, it's like, imagine as an analogy, this analogy actually is very old. It comes from Socrates. Imagine that you decide that you want to learn to play a musical instrument. Well, what do? First of all, of course, you get the instrument.
Right.
You get, hopefully, a good teacher. And a good teacher is not somebody who can play for you. You are the one that has to play. But the teacher can give you pointers on how to improve, and especially can tell you, now, look, this is not the right way to do it. They can correct mistakes from the beginning. But mostly, it's about practice. You just have to pick up the instrument every day, arguably for hours a day, and then little by little you improve. However, you don't want to play always the same little tune or little simple scale, because otherwise you're not going to get anywhere. You're going to get very good at doing that, and that's it. That's about it. You have to push yourself. Little by little, you increase the complexity of the scale, you increase the complexity of the tune, and that's how you make, you improve over time. Essentially, that's what Aristotle says we should do with our character. We should try to stay away from two opposite extremes. On the one hand, you don't want to make things too easy for yourself, because then you get bored and you don't make any progress. But you also, importantly, don't want to make things too difficult for yourself. Otherwise, you get frustrated and you give up. And that's actually what a lot of people do in my experience. They set the bar so high, and then they tell themselves, oh, I can't get there. It's a little bit like, to use another analogy, it's like a little bit like going to the gym. If you decide to go to the gym because it's good for your health and your muscles and aerobic capacity are going to be improving, great. But if you set an Olympic standard for your satisfaction with the gym, then most of us are not going to get there, and you're going to get frustrated and give up.
I gave a graduation lecture once where I used this exact model for physicians. And what I was advocating for, and I would argue that this is important for character as well, is look at the musicians and how they do it. This is a perfect model for learning high-level professional performance, but that we should all seek eventually to seek virtuosity. Not that virtuosity is going to be something you develop in the first few months, but much the way a musician can work for years at this, that's their goal. And that should be each of our goals with these things. I could talk to you all day, but I got to wrap it up. Where do you want people to find you?
On Substack at Figs in Wintertime. That is my newsletter where I write about science, pseudoscience, philosophy, and so on and so forth. Or at my website, massimopigliucci.net. So my first and last name as one thing, .net.
Great. Thank you for joining me. I hope to talk to you again soon.
It was a pleasure.
You bet. All right. So we're going to, now we've sort of set this up today now to bring in my friend Harvey Risch. I know in the banner for this show, we were talking about Dr. Makis's study that was pulled that is different than Dr. Risch and my study, which is affirming the possibility that these medications might have some utility. But I want to dig in with Dr. Risch exactly what these studies suggest and how to interpret these things and how not to get, as Dr. Pugliucci was just saying, not to get swept into pseudoscience or overthinking or being ideological in how you approach these things. Has to be done carefully and systematically. So Harvey Risch, who is a Yale epidemiologist, we've talked to him here before many times during all the nonsense of COVID, and he's here with me now after this. More of our audience is taking health and wellness into their own hands, and they're doing it with The Wellness Company. For a discount on the best-selling products and everything on their website, for that matter, go to drdrew.com/TWC. The medical emergency kits are among the most popular items. There are 8 different kits, each depending on your individual needs. Inside, you'll find antibiotics, antivirals, antiparasitics, first aid, anti-nauseal, skin treatments, and a kids kit with EpiPen and one for travel. The advantage to having an emergency kit in the house is immediacy. You don't have to run to the urgent care and spend a ton of money for all that infrastructure or wait for the pharmacy to open or try to find a doctor. And then there's Ultimate Spike Detox Supplement with nattokinase, turmeric, and bromelain. It has helped the vaccine injured. And anyone who is concerned about cardiovascular issues caused by lingering spike from the virus or the shot, the Ultimate Spike Detox is for you. One of TWC's top sellers is a topical ivermectin cream. It treats inflammation of the skin, issues like rosacea. The Wellness Company is always innovating. So go to drdrew.com/TWC to see what they have to offer and get a 10% discount there.
Hey, Dr. Drew here, and we are interested in health and longevity, and the longevity nutrient is Fatty 15, discovered amazingly by a veterinarian who was responsible for the Navy's fleet of dolphins. Turns out dolphins are healthier when they have adequate amounts of pentadecanoic acid, which is C15. It also, for us, it helps humans as well, reduces the oxidative stress on our cell membranes, which is part of the aging process called ferroptosis. So she takes it, I take it, whole family takes it. And if you'd like some, go to drdrew.com/fatty15 for yours. There are discounts there.
Oh my God, look, Drew, it's a dolphin. Oh my gosh.
Hey, Dr. Drew here, and even when we travel, we bring the new convenient fatty gummies. They're delicious, and they are portable, and they're great. And remember, this is a longevity ingredient. It fights against the oxidative stress on our cell membranes. We call that process ferroptosis, discovered in dolphin research by Dr. Van Watson. And I'm taking this every day, even when I travel. It's Fatty 15. And perhaps tax preparation is taking a toll, stressing you out, preparing, paying, waiting for your refunds. It's one of the reasons you might want to start your day with protein. Paleo Valley's grass-fed and finished bone broth packed with protein in the forms of collagen, great for gut health. Also helps with our connective tissue recovery. We do not get enough in our diets. Paleo Valley is the real deal. No pesticides, hormones, antibiotics, steroids, gluten, grain, soy, GMOs, no added sugar. They have vanilla, salted caramel, chocolate. I love the chocolate. Sweetness is from monk fruit. It's a natural sweetener. Susan used chocolate to make a Frappuccino today, and I could not save it for the show. I ate it. It was so good. I'm going to have her get on the mic at the end of this and tell us what was in there. So whatever else you're doing, if it's stressful, your body might want this for recovery. Go to doctor.com/Paleo Valley for 15% off your first time and 20% off when you subscribe. This was, Susan, this was seriously, I could not stop. It's the best Frappuccino I ever had. And knowing all the while, it was protein, not sugar. I was shocked.
I just used 1 scoop of Paleo Valley chocolate. You could use the vanilla or the salted caramel.
This was chocolate though, right?
Yes. Yeah. 1 teaspoon of instant coffee. I used Ely, which I love. Half a cup of whipping cream, like out of the container whipping cream, not
just
like
a little whipping cream.
No, like your whipping cream, like you use in your coffee every
there's
day.
a little bit of that. Okay, heavy cream.
Like
okay.
heavy cream.
Got it.
And then water and ice.
It was what a great meal replacement, frankly, and good dietary
It's like
supplement.
going to Starbucks and getting a Frappuccino without all the sugar.
Frappuccino is loaded with sugar and all kinds of crap.
Yeah.
This is like
it tastes
this
good.
is like pure. This is ought to make sure of it.
And Drew's a lot.
All right. Harvey Risch, you can follow it on X. Can you move that screen there, Susan? Dr. Harvey Risch, his last name is spelled R-I-S-C-H-D-R, Harvey Risch. Book is Toxic Shot, Facing the Dangers of the COVID Vaccine. Harvey, thank you. And as always, appreciate your work. Welcome.
It's great to be with you.
So help people, first of all, distinguish between what the TWC data and medical service team, medical board did with our recent, I guess, preprint. It's not published yet as far as I know, versus say what Dr. Makis did where he studied 3 cases that seemed to have a positive response.
Well, case reports and small case series reports do show instances of medical events that may or may not be generalizable. In our case, we were more interested in studying whether there was a systematic benefit of the medication that we TWC sells. This is the combination of ivermectin and mebendazole. It's a combined antiparasitic medications that may also have usage for treating cancer. And we learned recently that there's, in fact, some universities have patents on use of these medications for treating cancer. So this is not out of the blue. In any event, it's not widely used. Dr. Makis has been using it in his clinical practice. And because we at the Wellness Company have been providing this to people who have cancer and have come to us to see about whether they could add this to their treatment regimens, so they do a telemedicine visit with our clinicians, excuse me, to make sure that this is okay health-wise for them to try. And then they purchase these medications. And so what we decided to do was to do an initial survey and a follow-up survey to see just how they were doing. And so what we did is earlier, mid last year, we set up a survey and identified 200 sequential customers who had bought this medication and directed them to a web-based survey to fill out questions about their disease that they have and which organs and what stage it was and various other demographic information. And then after approximately 6 months, we recontacted them to see whether their cancers had spread or declined, what their health status was, how much of the medications did they use, whether they had any adverse reactions to these medications. And we got approximately 62% of the initial survey respondents to reply to the second survey. And what we found is in the second survey, the respondents, about half of them reported that their cancers had either completely gone away or had regressed, had declined. In addition, another third said that their cancers had stayed about the same. So overall, some 83-84% of people had obtained benefit from using these medications after an interval of about 6 months. Now, this is not proof that the medications treat cancer by any means, but it does provide some evidence that basically suggests here's a signal that these medications can be providing benefit, and we need to conduct randomized trials or some kind of more aggressive definitive studies to determine whether this medication has a role in an adjunctive role in adding to whatever treatment regimens people are taking for their cancers to see if whether it improves things and might help them. We need to know this definitively because these are not very expensive compared to the cost of chemotherapy. And if they help cancer patients in general at something they can buy from us or from somewhere else, then why wouldn't they want to add these things that have very low levels of adverse effects on them?
Yeah. Yeah, it's insane that the scientific community, the clinical community wouldn't want us at least asking this question. I was very skeptical that we would have a positive result, but I read the study very carefully. And I too, as one of the authors, I went back to Nick. I said, look, you've got to state everywhere. This isn't we're not saying anything except that there's a signal here that warrants further study. And it was a bit of a club, you know what I mean? There was all kinds of cancers, and we would sort of categorize them, and sort of the way people were answering their questionnaires were a little inaccurate, but there was still something there, and the study was done very well. And I know you were on top of it the whole way, because I have no way of knowing our questionnaires giving us anything, right? How do we determine that the questions we're asking are really giving us what we want to know? And then people are dropping out, as you point out, and what is a relevant sample size, and then what is relevant within that sample size in terms of a positive result. I was convinced from the analysis we did that I was surprised. I was actually pleasantly surprised that there may be something here. And so then my next thought is, well, why not? It doesn't hurt anything. It's harmless.
Well, by and large, people had only slight bits of gastrointestinal discomforts that were transient. Very, very few people changed their dosing. Almost nobody stopped taking it. Many people took more than the initial amount. It was up to them to decide how they wanted to use the product. And I also was quite pleasantly surprised that this seems to be providing some benefit. And the company is planning on repeating the survey with larger numbers to see if this is systematic. At least we'll have the same kind of additional data.
And let's be 1,000% clear. This wasn't instead of traditional treatment. This was in addition to, or when late stages, when nothing else was available to them. This is what's called an adjunctive treatment. And my God, I've seen many oncologists go, you want to try it? Sure, go ahead. Why not? There is a right to try out there. And this one drug, because people have had this weird bias against it, I've been taking crap on X just raising awareness about this study and going, look, this is something interesting. I actually didn't even do it. Somebody put it on my thread for me.
Well, we're not treating cancer in horses. That's the ivermectin
for sure. And yeah, it's the weirdest thing. It's that there's so much energy around this thing. To me, I'm just generally, skeptical, but I want to ask questions. And if there's a repurposed drug, this is the same stuff this same kind of headwind that Steve Kirsch ran into when he was repurposing fluvoxamine, which personally I found very useful for my long COVID. Very useful. And he had some very positive results.
Well, I wasn't involved in that research, so I can't really speak to that. I helped design and carry out this study for the wellness company, and I think we did a good job with it insofar as the response rates are justifiable. They're not pristine, but typically in epidemiological kinds of studies, this is how you do. And it's within the acceptability range for our response rates. I think that we really are saying this needs to be studied in much more depth, in much more definitively.
Yeah.
And why not? Yeah. We're not replacing chemotherapy. We're not replacing surgery. We're not replacing anything of which there's some kind of pharma or other economic interest. We're adding to all of that. And so there should be no conflict of interest for somebody saying not to do it.
And you've used the word chemotherapy, and unfortunately that has a talking to Massimo about cognitive biases. This has an emotional bias to it. When people think of chemotherapy, they really talk about cytotoxic chemotherapy, which is not used today very often. Even when it is used, it's very targeted. It's a monoclonal antibody is attached. The cytotoxic agent is attached to a monoclonal antibody, so it goes to each individual cancerous cell, not poisoning the whole body. Now, do we use those cytotoxic agents? Yes, sometimes. But when people talk about cancer treatment, they're talking about their CAR T cells, checkpoint inhibitors, JAK inhibitors, tyrosine kinase inhibitors, things that are not at all like the old notion of chemo. And we're usually stacking things. We're adding things where we can. And this is something that could potentially be added. But I just want to be careful that I'm not encouraging people oncology has made massive progress in the last 10 years in particular, and you should be taking advantage of that. And hopefully this observation will add to some of that progress. Could you explain, Harvey, what your career was over at Yale also?
Well, I started out as a cancer researcher. After medical school, I went and got a PhD, which is actually in mathematical modeling of infectious epidemics. And I did a postdoctoral fellowship in epidemiology at the University of Washington, started doing cancer research, and spent almost 40 years doing research in the causation of different kinds of cancers, published approximately 400 peer-reviewed papers in medical journals. And then COVID hit, and got sidetracked into dealing with the pandemic, and was early on very involved in early outpatient treatment that the late Dr. Zelenko had pioneered in the U.S., following on South Korean and Chinese knowledge of the use of hydroxychloroquine for the early treatment of COVID, which turned out to be very, very useful, as when it was used during the first year by some doctors across the U.S. in treating maybe 300,000 or 400,000 people with COVID. That was very strongly pushed against, and my job in the pandemic was basically just to say, well, I've been a scientist my whole academic career. Why would I not be a scientist now? I'm just going to look at things and try to use critical thinking and understand everything that's been going on, and that's how I've approached it.
Do you have a feeling reality is reasserting itself a bit, that people are assessing the excesses of that time and acknowledging that a lot of what you were saying was correct?
Well, yes and no. I think there's some of that the Overton window for speaking about those excesses and misrepresentations is now a lot more open. But at the same time, we become scientifically a wild west where nobody can tell what's actually true. Yeah. Even scientists have a hard time reading papers and deciding whether they're true or not. So both things are, I think, operative now.
No, it's fine. I don't know if you heard the interview I had with Massimo Puglici. That's how I opened that conversation with him. He's a, evolutionary biologist and a Stoic philosopher and interested in pseudoscience and things. And I said to him, I go, forget how do we know what's real and what's not? How does the public ever figure this out? I think that's why they're sort of falling into these belief buckets where they're ideologically, religiously protecting their sense of what is real, but it has no basis in any kind of scientific reality necessarily.
Well, maybe 2 decades ago, in the epidemiologic literature, every week a new study would come out saying the opposite of the previous week, and on and on and on. And my wife asked me, well, how do you know what's actually true? And I said, well, you read the papers carefully, you read between the lines, you read the methods section, you think of address whether it's all consistent and scientifically up and up as far as you can tell. And then you have to know the investigators. You have to know their own standards of the quality of science that they do. And that's an important component that you can't really know when you're not in the field, and even for people in the field, new people come in all the time and haven't established themselves, and so you don't really know. And basically, it's a track record that you only learn about over the longer term.
You know, it's funny. Massimo said almost the exact same thing. And it's like, it's who's saying it and under what circumstances. And as my dad used to say, whose ox is being gored? In other words, do they have any priorities outside of the scientific scrutiny? Let's take a quick call. Do you mind? You up for one?
Sure.
All right. This is Dan, I believe. Yeah, Dan, I'm going to get to you right here. There you are. I believe you are on the air. You're my first caller since we put in this new system. So thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate everything you've been doing the last few years, and all the guests you have on have been very helpful.
Thanks,
yeah, I kind of tied into what you just discussed earlier with the psychology of it, I guess, too. But I have a story where three of my sisters unfortunately passed away about 17 months. But what I want to say is, too, is tied to that psychology of it is I was in pharmaceutical sales for 12 years. I was a virus pandemic rep for almost 7, and I was in the 2009 pandemic. And what was interesting is when this was all happening, starting in January of 2020, not one of my siblings asked me. Like, they didn't say, well, what do you think? What is your experience? You know what I mean? They really were captivated by the TV and the news, and all of them got vaccinated except for me. And I had read Moderna's trial in May 2020. That's kind of led me first to kind of hesitate. But that's all I want to comment on. It's just the psychology of it was so strong, and the fear factor. And people, I don't think people went to other people even to ask. You know what I mean? Like they would.
Yeah, Dan. I'm going to put you back in the queue, and we'll keep talking about this because it's a fascinating question. And I'm so sorry about your sisters, because one of the things, Harvey, I'm worried about is that we're going to see some evidence that I don't know if it's just that spike protein, whether it's from COVID or from vax, which has the potential of overproducing spike, is going to cause some sort of progressive neurological problem or immune suppression, like a slow building AIDS type thing. And there's some evidence that something like that is happening. Have you seen any of that?
Yes. I've seen some anecdotal evidence. Nick Hulsher reported today that in the military, there has been some, about half of vaccinated soldiers had measurable abnormalities in their heart muscle that is maybe not clinically so significant, but it's still anxiety producing. He suggested everybody should use methods to reduce their circulating spike. I've also seen some data that I can't really talk about yet of increases in cancer, unexplainable, after the pandemic, starting in 2021 and especially into 2022 and continuing. We've been worrying about this, although I've been very hesitant to say this because we have no population data yet in that time period, because our cancer registries, the US registry and the Canadian registries, only have data going up through 2023. And they take a long time before they put out their data. And so we don't really know yet what's going on. But I've seen other insurance company data suggesting that this is a real effect for some cancers. And so when we vet that and determine its truth or validity, then we'll have something more to say about it.
And Dan asked us to address the psychology. I am firmly of the belief that this was a mass formation. I didn't realize how prone humans are to this phenomenon. I thought it was something they did under extreme distress or, under an ideological wind that blows through the middle of the 20th century that we learned not to do again. Turns out it's something more intrinsic in us as large societies, where 20% of us become true believers.
We didn't learn not to do that. We were on pause, but we didn't learn not to do that. We did it in COVID, and we're doing it again now.
What are we doing it for now?
We're doing it now for an existential war against the United States that a radical, fringe, religious, fanatical group wants to destroy the whole Western world, and especially us as the leader of it. And it was on the verge of having the technology to do so. And people are just cannot see that our very existence was at risk.
So, and let me just explain to people the construct is 20% become true believers one way or the other. And True Believers is a great book out there called True Believers. I recommend it. He just did an observational review of how true believers behave, and I think he absolutely nailed it. True believers are dangerous. 10% of the population says, hey, what the hell's going on here? So hang on, stop. And those people are, of course, are crushed by the true believers. And 70% are just wanting to be left alone to live their life. And it's that 70% that we really must get mobilized again to bring us back to some sort of sanity. Harvey, I've got to wrap this up. Is there, finish up. Go ahead. Say that again.
So this is what Sharansky said about life under the Soviet Union, that he put it as 30% true believers, 30% scoffers, and 40% in the middle.
Yeah. But that was when the evidence was more apparent that things were horrible. And so it was easier to be a not true believer, to be a scoffer, so to speak. And by the way, calls, hold on. I'm going to go back to more calls in a minute. Do not leave because I'm saying goodbye to Dr. Risch. Where should we look for you, Harvey?
If you just Google me, my Yale website page comes up. And from there, it lists my Twitter and Telegram channels, which I comment periodically, not all that often. And that's probably the best place.
And are we going to put this paper up as a preprint? As people be able to read it?
As soon as it gets mounted on a preprint server, I looked today, I haven't seen it yet. But as soon as it comes up, then it'll be public.
Fair enough. Thank you so much, sir.
Great to be with you.
You as always. I appreciate your participation here. Okay, let me go quickly to our callers. Oh no, did I? Here we go. This was Anthony had a question about recovery. I want to deal with that kind of stuff too here today. Anthony, are you there?
Dr. Drew, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm very good. I've been a long-time listener. I used to tune in to Loveline in my bedroom when I was 14 years old, and I've learned a lot from you over the decades.
Good. Excellent.
And I'd like to know a little bit more. So
today?
I'm approaching my one-year medallion program, one-year medallion date in AA program, and working the steps. I'm on my fourth step doing my inventory. And I'm just kind of curious if you can explain from a scientific, medical, emotional, psychological standpoint, why the 12-step program is effective and why you think there has to be a spiritual component to the program and why that proves
that's the
to
hard
be
part.
a particularly effective intervention.
Yeah. The spiritual part is the toughest thing for me to speak to because you asked for it as a psychological, scientific perspective. I know that it's essential. I've seen it work. It's empirically really important. But I'll try. So there's a guy named John Kelly. He runs the Harvard addiction program at the medical school at Harvard. He wrote a very important paper, a meta-analysis of all available data on the utility and efficacy of what he called mutual aid or 12-step. And he showed very clearly that mutual aid worked as well as any professionally managed services. So in other words, seeing a psychologist on a regular basis or being in a hospital, 12-step, it was an essential part and worked as well as any of the professionally managed services and worked better when abstinence was the goal, which of course it always should be if you have this disease called addiction. I don't want to get into that topic, but believe me, that's a empiric fact. And what he discovered was that the 12-step has all of the elements that we usually use in professionally managed treatment. It's being honest with yourself. It's disclosing. It's creating, looking at resentments, building an inventory of character flaws and sort of examining with another person. And then I think a really critical piece is sharing this intimate contact, this difficult material with another person who can look back at you and say, me too, or I understand because I've been there. And that kind of safety of intimacy and regulating with another person becomes critically important. Closeness with another, your brains heal other brains, and your sponsor is going to help you heal your brain. theoretically, the higher power is yet another element in that. But most importantly, it's getting you out of your brain into something greater than yourself. Because as you know, with addiction, you can be very self-preoccupied, you can be very controlling, you can sort of not be able to see past your nose, and to have a sense of things bigger than yourself, whatever that means for you, whether it's attaching yourself to some concept of God or religious, whatever it is, getting out of your head, because your head and your thinking will lead you right back to your addiction, right? So it is all of these elements and many others. And so back to Dr. Kelly's sort of important research, he showed that people don't always all do everything in the 12-step, but they always do get out of them what they need. In other words, there's a lot there for people to get, and you can get what you need, and you go back around and do it again. And here's what I always tell everybody: it's free. It's free. It's effective. And so now with Zoom, it's available 24/7. And oh, did I say it's free? We worry about the cost of healthcare. Here's an effective treatment that is free. And the fact that anybody assails that is insane. So you're at your liberty to find other means to sobriety and other means to treatment, for sure. But this one's free. It stands up to scientific scrutiny, does the same thing as professionally managed services, only better when you're trying to stay completely sober. So there's my pitch. All right, Anthony?
Thanks, Dr. Drew. I appreciate that. You're the reason I'm in recovery, and I am very grateful.
God bless you. And look to Dr. Kelly's work. I think I'm going to wrap up at this point. We'll just take a couple calls. I want to warn everybody that I'm going to take calls hopefully every show. We will have shows where I dedicate to calls, but most of the calls, though, I think the way we're going to do this is kind of sprinkling things in. Now, obviously, if we have a very controversial guest and you guys want to get in here with them, I'm going to let more people in. But please be patient with us as we build our approach here. But I loved Dan and Anthony's calls, and I'm going to leave it at that today. We're sort of out of time. Let's bring up our... Yeah.
True. It's just amazing to watch, because the moment a caller came on the show, it's like you had a huge energy boost. It's like you're right back in your natural habitat, which is exactly what I was hoping for as a producer. So the more times we have people on the air, the more people who are going to call in with interesting stuff. So that was really fun to watch. And, it like threw me back to Loveline days.
It is Loveline stuff, and it's also what I do clinically all the time, and so it's right in my zone. It's in my zone of expertise, I guess. Thank you, guys. Let me look quick at the restream while Caleb puts the upcoming guests on the screen there. Yes, cognitive reprogramming is very concerning. Thank you, guys. There's coming up. Uncle Cliff is a guy I found on the internet. I just want to hear his philosophy. I want like everyman philosophers. I want some input from the street. He's going to give me that. We have also Sean Spicer coming in. We have Patricia Heaton coming in. Dr. Kelly Victory's coming back. Brianna Wu, you guys like that. Nick Freitas. And that is, who's in the bottom? Dr. Ryan Cole. We haven't talked to him in a long time.
And Aaron Siri.
And we have, where did I see that?
With Dr. Ryan Cole on the 15th.
Brandon Straka's coming in. The camera's right in front of that, so I can't see that. Interesting. So listen, we appreciate you all being here. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for those that
Thank you, Scotty, for the call.
Yes, thank you, Scotty, for the nice shout out. We saw that. Let me look at the rants. I haven't looked here yet really quickly. Susan, anything going on the rants? I know you spent a little time there.
No. I mean, everybody liked the conversation.
Okay, good. Interesting guests. We appreciate them, and we appreciate you all for being here with us. We'll be here again tomorrow at 4:00 Pacific time. Ask Dr. Drew is produced by Caleb Nation and Susan Pinsky. Emily Barsh is our content producer. As a reminder, the discussions here are not a substitute for medical care, diagnosis, or treatment. This show is intended for educational and informational purposes only. I am a licensed physician, but I am not a replacement for your personal doctor, and I am not practicing medicine here. Always remember that our understanding of medicine and science is constantly evolving. Though my opinion is based on the information that is available to me today, some of the contents of this show could be outdated in the future. Be sure to check with trusted resources in case any of the information has been updated since this was published.
If you or someone you know is in immediate danger, don't call me, call 911. If you're feeling hopeless or suicidal, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255. You can find more of my recommended organizations and helpful resources at drdrew.com/help.